The message went out at 3:17 in the morning. Marcus didn't plan it that way. He had been sitting on the cold tile of his apartment bathroom, still wearing the suit he'd rented for a wedding that never happened, and he had typed the message the way a man types when he has nothing left to protect. Honestly, without theater, without the careful calibration of every word that had governed every communication between them for the past 2 years. He hit send before he could stop himself. Then he set the phone face down on the tile and stared at the grout lines until his vision blurred. He was not thinking about alien contact protocols. He was not thinking about the 11 months of covert xenolinguistics work he had done for the Department of Recovered Signals, or about the fact that the signal they'd been translating, the one everyone called the chorus, the one that had been playing on a loop from somewhere, past the orbit of Neptune since 2031, contained, buried in its tertiary frequency band, a mathematical structure that his colleague Dr. Yeva Osman had identified 3 weeks ago as a warning, not a greeting. He was thinking about Selene Park. Selene, who ran the Pacific Rim operations of Harrow Voss Logistics with the precision of someone who had grown up deciding that the universe owed her nothing, and she would take everything anyway. Selene, whose assistant had called Marcus at noon on what was supposed to be their wedding day from a blocked number, clinical in its brevity, to inform him that Ms. Park would not be attending. No explanation. No call from Selene herself, just the assistant's voice, apologetic in that particular corporate way that means the apology has been workshopped, and then silence. Marcus had stood at the front of a garden in Marin County for 20 minutes before his sister, Danny, physically took him by the elbow and walked him to a car. He was 34 years old. He had spent the last 8 months of his life trying to decode a signal from beyond the solar system, and he had failed in the same period to decode the woman he was supposed to marry. The message he sent at 3:17 a.m. said, "I'm not angry. I don't need an explanation. I just want you to know that I was there. I was there and I meant all of it. Whatever happened to you today, whatever made you run, I hope you find your way back from it. Not to me, just back." He did not expect a reply. He did not expect, 40 minutes later, for his phone to ring with a call from the secure line at the Department of Recovered Signals, where Dr. Osman's voice was tighter than he had ever heard it. "Marcus, I need you to come in." "It's 4 in the morning, Yeva." The chorus changed. It changed 43 minutes ago. "The warning structure is gone. There's something new in the signal and I can't." She stopped. He heard her breathing. "I need you to come in right now." He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror, suit, no tie, eyes like he'd been awake for 2 days, which he had. "Give me 20 minutes, he said. The Department of Recovered Signals operated out of a converted naval facility in Alameda that looked, from the outside, like a warehouse that had given up. Inside, it hummed with the particular energy of people who had been awake too long and had decided that coffee was a philosophy. Marcus badged through 3 checkpoints and found Yeva in the signal room, standing in front of a wall of displays that should have shown the familiar rolling mathematical architecture of the chorus, and instead showed something that made the back of his skull go cold. "It's structured," he said, stepping up beside her. "Yes. That's not the same signal." "No," she pulled up her analysis on a secondary screen. "The chorus has been playing for 6 years, constant. Same frequency, same interval, same tertiary band warning structure. 43 minutes ago it stopped mid-cycle, and this started." What was on the screen was not the elegant, almost musical mathematics of the chorus. It was denser, layered in a way that felt less like language and more like architecture, like someone had taken the grammar of the chorus and used it to build a room, and then filled the room with something. "Is it responsive?" Marcus asked. Yeva looked at him. She had the expression she always got when she had already run the scenario she was about to describe and hadn't liked any of the outcomes. "The interval between pulses," she said carefully, is 43 minutes, which is how long ago the chorus stopped. Marcus stood very still. You're saying it responded to the chorus stopping. I'm saying the timing is exact to the second. And I'm saying that the new signal contains a structural element. Here, look. She pointed to a cluster of data that Marcus recognized with the slow, creeping certainty of someone who has studied a thing long enough to see it even in disguise. That is a direct encoding of the warning structure from the tertiary band. But inverted. Inverted how? The warning said, "Do not approach." This says. She let the pause sit there like a stone in water. The structural inversion of asterisk "do not approach" is "we are coming." The room was very quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a coffee machine beeped. Marcus said, "How long?" Yeva pulled up a second screen. Based on signal propagation and the source location, we've triangulated near the heliopause, 12 days. 12 days was not enough time. It was not enough time for the governments who were quietly, furiously notified to agree on a response. It was not enough time for the public, who found out via a leaked signal analysis posted to 3 different astrophysics forums simultaneously, to process what was coming. It was not enough time for the Department of Recovered Signals, which was now operating under a new name, the Department of First Contact Protocols, which had the energy of a committee formed on the deck of the Titanic, to agree on what a first contact protocol even looked like. Marcus spent most of those 12 days in the signal room. He slept in a cot in the break room for 3 hours at a stretch. He ate whatever Yeva put in front of him. He did not look at his phone. On the 9th day, Danny drove to Alameda and sat in the parking lot until a security officer called Marcus, who came outside in a borrowed jacket that was slightly too large, and found his sister leaning against her car with a thermos, and the expression she'd had since childhood when she had decided she was going to say something and no force in the universe was going to stop her. "You look terrible," she said. "Thank you." "She called me," Danny held out the thermos, "2 days ago." Marcus took the thermos. He looked at the facility behind him, the ugly building, the antenna arrays on the roof, the ordinary morning sky that had, for 9 days, contained something that was not ordinary anymore. He looked back at his sister. "What did she say?" "She said she panicked." Danny's voice was careful, not soft. Danny was never soft. She was precise in the way their mother had been precise, scalpel instead of cushion. "She said she's been panicking for a long time. She said the wedding made it real and real terrified her because everything real has been taken from her and she—" Danny stopped. "She asked me if you were okay." "I'm translating an alien signal, Danny. I'm spectacularly not okay." "She doesn't know about that part yet." "Nobody knows about that part yet." "They will in 3 days." Danny looked at him. "She read your message." Marcus opened the thermos. The coffee inside was good. Danny had always known how to make good coffee. It was one of the things she'd inherited from their mother that Marcus had not. He thought about the message. He thought about 3:17 a.m. and bathroom tile and the honesty that comes out of you when you have nothing left to protect. "Okay," he said. "She wants to talk to you." "Tell her to wait 3 days," Marcus said. "After that, whether or not she wants to talk to me is going to seem like a fairly small problem." He was wrong about that. Not about the 3 days. The Vorath arrived on exactly the schedule the signal had implied, which was the first indicator that they were not interested in leaving margin for human variables. The Vorath vessel appeared at 6:47 a.m. Pacific time on the 12th day, decelerating into a stable orbit between Earth and the Moon with the unhurried certainty of something that had never had reason to hurry. It was large. The scale was difficult to process from the ground. The optical telescopes put it at roughly the size of a small American state, which was the kind of comparison that sounded insane until you saw the images, and then it just sounded inevitable. They did not attempt communication. This Marcus had been afraid of. The chorus, 6 years of it, had been a signal they could work with, a mathematical structure that implied intelligence and intent and, crucially, time. The Vorath vessel simply parked itself in orbit and did nothing, which was in some ways more frightening than an attack, because nothing is the space in which humans project their worst imagination. The Department of First Contact Protocols, 12 people in a repurposed naval facility with a coffee machine that beeped at inconvenient moments, spent 36 hours attempting to transmit responses using the mathematical structure of the chorus. Nothing. Marcus was the one who suggested they try the new signal, the one that said "we are coming," the inverted warning. "We don't know what that signal means in full," said the department's new director, a physicist named Calloway who had been drafted from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and had the look of a man who had aged 15 years in 2 weeks. "We know what the structure means," Marcus said, "and we know they sent it in a form we could understand. They used our grammar. They inverted our warning. Whatever that was, it wasn't just a navigation announcement. It was a message, and messages have replies. What do you want to send back?" Marcus looked at the wall of displays. He looked at the rolling architecture of the chorus, at the denser structure of the new signal, at the mathematics of something so far outside human experience that the only frame he had for it was language, imperfect, barnacle-covered, deeply human language. "The structural inversion of 'we are coming,'" he said, "is 'we are here.' I want to send them that. And then I want to send them something they didn't give us." "Which is?" "A question." The question took 11 hours to encode. Marcus worked with Yeva, and a mathematician named Tors who had been flown in from MIT, and who approached the problem the way Marcus imagined a safecracker approached a particularly interesting vault, with focused, almost aesthetic appreciation for the mechanism, completely unconcerned by what might be inside. They built the question out of the mathematical vocabulary the Vorath had established with the chorus, layered it with the inverted structures from the new signal, and at the end of it appended something that had no precedent in either signal set. A prime number sequence, which was the oldest and most human of all the things humans had ever tried to say to the dark. "We are here, what do you want?" It felt inadequate. Marcus thought of his 3:17 a.m. message, the honesty that comes out when you have nothing left to protect, and he thought perhaps inadequacy was exactly right. Perhaps the right answer to something overwhelming was not a carefully calibrated response, but a true one. They transmitted at 4:03 a.m. At 4:47 a.m., the Vorath vessel responded. Not with mathematics. What came back was a signal that the Department of Recovered Signals had no framework for, which was terrifying for approximately 11 minutes until Yeva, who had not slept in 31 hours and had reached the particular plateau of exhaustion where the brain stops filtering and starts free associating, said, "It's spatial." "What?" "It's not a language signal. It's not mathematics. She pulled it apart on her display, layer by layer, the way you peel something to find what's underneath. It's a map." The map took 6 hours to render into anything interpretable. When it did, what it showed was a location, not on the surface of the Earth, not anywhere in the solar system. A coordinate that, when checked against the best astronomical data the department had access to, pointed to a region of space approximately 40 light-years distant where, as far as any human telescope had ever been able to determine, there was nothing of particular interest. Calloway stared at the map for a long time. "They want us to go there." "That's one interpretation," Tors said, from behind his third coffee. "What's another interpretation?" "That they're showing us where they came from." "Why would they do that?" Marcus was looking at the map. He was thinking about the chorus, 6 years of it, a signal playing on repeat, a warning that said "do not approach." He was thinking about the fact that it had stopped. He was thinking about the inversion, the structural grammar of the reply, the way the Vorith had used human mathematical vocabulary to build their message, which meant they had been listening to human transmissions long enough to learn that vocabulary, which meant. "They came here anyway," he said. Everyone in the room looked at him. The chorus said, "Do not approach." "We didn't approach, we couldn't, we don't have the capability, but they came here anyway." Which means the warning wasn't for us. The silence in the room had texture. "The warning," Marcus said slowly, working it out as he spoke the way he always worked through translations from the outside in, was broadcast in all directions. It was playing for 6 years, and it stopped the moment the Vorith vessel arrived, because it was a warning to anyone else who might be listening. He looked at the map. He looked at the coordinate 40 light-years away. The map isn't where they came from. The map is where the thing they were warning about is coming from. The next 72 hours were the most compressed and terrible of Marcus's life, which was saying something given the previous 2 weeks. The Vorith sent no further signals. The vessel stayed in orbit. The world, which had by now been informed of the situation in the controlled, careful language of governments trying to prevent panic, was not preventing panic. Marcus continued to work. He slept in 4-hour increments. He ate whatever Yeva put in front of him, which was increasingly strange. At some point the department's supply chain for normal food had apparently broken down and been replaced by whatever happened to be in people's cars. So there were a lot of granola bars and one memorable meal of gas station, sushi that Tors consumed without visible distress. On the second of those 72 hours his phone rang, not the secure line, his personal phone. He stared at Selene Park's name on the screen for 3 full seconds. Then he answered. "Hi," she said. "Hi." There was a pause of the kind that has weight in it. Not awkward. Marcus and Selene had never been awkward. That was one of the things about them. They had always been capable of silence with each other in a way that felt like a room rather than an absence. "I read your message," she said. "I know, Danny told me." "I've read it a lot, actually." Another pause. "Marcus, I need to." "Selene," he said it gently. I know you need to explain, and I want to hear it, I do, but I need to tell you something first." "Okay." "There's something happening. I can't tell you what it is yet. But in the next, I don't know, days, weeks, maybe less, it's going to become very publicly known, and when it does, the things that feel like the biggest problems right now are going to look different." He stopped. "I'm not saying that to dismiss what happened. I'm saying it because..." He pressed his palm against the wall of the break room, the cold institutional paint, the ordinary human texture of it. "I want you to be ready for things to look different, that's all." Another silence. Then, "Are you in danger?" "I'm in a building in Alameda, eating gas station sushi." "That's not an answer." "No," he said. "I don't think so. I don't think any of us are right now. I think the danger is somewhere else. I think," he looked at the ceiling, "I think something a very long way away is coming, and something else is trying to help us get ready. And I think the only reason I'm the person in the room is because I spent the last 8 months learning to listen." "You've always been good at listening," Selene said quietly. He closed his eyes. "Call me in 3 days," he said, "or don't. Either way is okay. Either way I meant what I said." He hung up before she could answer, because he had learned, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, that sometimes the most honest thing you can do is refuse to negotiate the ending. On the 61st hour, the Vorith sent a second map. This one was overlaid on the first, same coordinate, same region of space, 40 light-years out, but with a new element that Tors identified almost immediately as a time stamp. A countdown, encoded in the same mathematical structure as the chorus, using the same prime number rhythms that the Vorith had spent 6 years learning from human transmissions. The countdown showed 112 days. "Until what?" Calloway said. "Until whatever is at that coordinate arrives here," Marcus said. He didn't say it dramatically. There was no drama left in him. He said it the way you say a true thing after you've been awake long enough that performance becomes impossible. The Vorith aren't invading. They came here to warn us. The room was silent. Then Tors, who had been doing math on a notepad for the previous 4 minutes, said, "The Vorith vessel, based on the deceleration profile we observed, would have needed to begin its journey toward us well before the chorus started. Maybe 30, 40 years before. So they've been on their way here for the better part of a century," Yeva said slowly. "Not on their way here," Marcus said. "On their way to intercept whatever is coming from that coordinate." He looked at the map. "They're not here because of us. We were in the way. We happened to be on the trajectory. And then they found us and he thought about the chorus. 6 years of it. A warning, but also, he now understood, a gift. Enough time for the primitive species in the path to develop the mathematical vocabulary to have a conversation. They slowed down. Calloway sat down heavily in a chair. They slowed down for us. They've been slowing down for 6 years. Marcus looked at the displays, at the rolling structure of the chorus, the thing he had spent 8 months learning to read. That's what the chorus is. It's not just a warning. It's them buying us time to catch up. Time to learn enough to understand what's coming. He paused. Time to ask them for help. The third message from the Vorith vessel came 6 hours later. This one was different from the others. It was not a map. It was not mathematics. It was encoded in the chorus's own structure, the original signal, but transformed, taken apart and rebuilt using the elements that Marcus and his team had been transmitting back for the past 3 days. The Vorith had been listening, not just in the past 6 years. In the past 3 days, every transmission the department had sent, every attempt to respond, every clumsy, hopeful, tired human effort to reach across the incomprehensible gap. The Vorith had taken all of it and woven it into this message like material to work with. It took Marcus 14 hours to fully translate. It was not long, as messages go. Mathematical messages never are. The compression ratio of a precise idea to its symbolic expression is much higher than natural language, which bloats everything with redundancy and nuance, and the emotional insulation humans build into speech to protect themselves from what they mean. What the Vorith said, stripped to its structure, was this. "You asked what we want. We want what all things that know they will not survive alone want, not to be alone. We have prepared what we can. We will share it. What you do with what we share, this is yours. We cannot give you more time. What is coming does not negotiate, but it can be survived. Humans have survived what should not be survived before. We know this about you. This is why we slowed down." Marcus sat with the translation for a long time before he showed it to anyone. He thought about a film he'd watched as a kid, some low-budget science fiction thing his sister had found and made him sit through, about 2 teenagers who'd built a machine in their garage and accidentally opened a door to somewhere else, and had jumped through anyway, because on the other side were the people they couldn't afford to lose. He thought about that image, the door, the light, the jump without knowing what was on the other side. He thought about 3:17 a.m. and bathroom tile, and the message sent without calculation, without protection, without any strategy except the oldest human strategy, which is to put the truth into the air and hope something good comes back. The Vorith had slowed down. They had spent decades decelerating toward a planet they had not planned to stop at, because there was life on it, and life that they could communicate with, and life, the message implied, that had a specific quality the Vorith had recognized as valuable. The quality of surviving what should not be survived. He thought about what that meant. He thought about the resilience encoded in the word humans, in the historical record of a species that had walked into every catastrophe it had ever faced with insufficient preparation, questionable strategy, and a stubbornness that most polite observers would call irrational. He thought about the fact that they were still here. He thought about Selene. He thought about how the message he'd sent at 3:17 a.m. "I was there. I meant all of it was, at its core, the same thing the Vorath had just said. We cannot give you more time, but we slowed down, and this is why. He showed Calloway the translation. Calloway read it 3 times. His hands were very still on the desk. What do we do? He said. We tell them yes, Marcus said. We tell them we accept what they want to share, and then we actually do the hard work of receiving it. We have 112 days. No, Marcus shook his head. We have whatever time the Vorath have been quietly spending to make this handoff work. We have 6 years of the chorus, which I now believe is not just a warning signal, but a compressed library of everything they think we need to know. We've been treating it as a message. It's a curriculum. He looked at Yeva. Start from the beginning, not looking for the warning structure, looking for everything else. What they found in the chorus was staggering. It took the entire department, working in rotating shifts, 48 days to begin to understand the scope of it. The warning structure, the asterisk do not approach that had been the signal's most legible element, was the outer layer, the label. Inside the chorus, encoded in frequencies that required knowing the label's mathematical vocabulary to even begin to parse, was something that Yeva eventually described in a department-wide meeting where everyone looked like they had personally been through a war, as a tool chest. Not metaphorically. The chorus contained in compressed mathematical form design specifications, physics that human science had not yet reached but would recognize as coherent once translated, principles of what the Vorath called in the nearest English approximation Marcus could construct, the physics of endurance, materials science, shielding architecture, signal jamming, not weapons. This was the thing that struck Marcus hardest when he understood it, that of everything the Vorath had sent, none of it was weapons. All of it was armor. All of it was designed to protect, to persist, to survive an encounter with something that was not interested in negotiation. The Vorath, Marcus came to understand, did not fight. They endured. And they had come a very long way and slowed down for a very long time to give a species that could fight something it had never had before, a shield. On the 53rd day, while Torres was running calculations on the shielding specifications, and Yeva was 3 whiteboards deep into the physics, and Calloway was on a secure video call with what sounded like several world leaders arguing in 4 languages simultaneously, Marcus's personal phone rang. He answered. "Hi," Selene said. "Hi. You said to call in 3 days. A pause. I'm a little late." 50 days. I was processing. Another pause, this one lighter. The news is everywhere, the broadcasts, the Vorath. The signal. He could hear her moving, the familiar sound of her pacing, which she always did when she was thinking hard. I keep looking at the coverage and trying to find you in the background of the images, and I can't, but I know you're in there somewhere. Alameda, California, he said. Same building. Marcus, her voice changed. The careful Selene, the CEO Selene, the one who had assistants call people on blocked numbers, was gone. What was left was the Selene he had met 3 years ago at a conference in Seoul, who had been the only other person standing at the window at 2 a.m. looking at the city instead of at the party. "I'm sorry. I should have said it to you, not had someone else call. I should have called myself. I should have." "Selene. I know you said it was okay, but it wasn't, and you deserve." "I was there," he said. "I meant all of it. That hasn't changed." He heard her breathe. "Has anything changed for you?" The pause was long. Not uncertain. Selene was never uncertain. She was decisive to the point of being alarming. It was one of the things he loved about her, the way she moved through the world like someone who had already calculated the risk and decided to proceed. The pause was something else. The pause was the sound of a person who has been running, arriving at the end of a very long road and finding that they are okay. "No," she said, "nothing has changed for me." "Then come to Alameda," he said. "When you can. The work is going to go on a while. 112 days just became 60. but eventually there will be an evening, and I would like to spend it with you." "The end of the world," she said. "Very romantic." "We might save it," Marcus said. "Preliminary indications are positive." She laughed. It was the laugh he'd been carrying around like something fragile for 50 days, and hearing it made the cold, fluorescent light of the break room feel briefly, completely, like somewhere he was glad to be. The thing that was coming arrived on day 97, not day 112. No one had accounted for variance. This was the kind of mistake that, afterward, the histories would call asterisk understandable given the circumstances, which was the most generous possible framing for the fact that nobody had asked the Vorath what the margin of error was. Marcus was asleep in the break room when the alerts went off. He was awake and in the signal room in 4 minutes, which was the fastest he had moved in weeks and which left him slightly dizzy, leaning on the desk next to Yeva with his heart going too fast, and the displays showing something that the Vorath had, it turned out, tried to warn them about in the chorus. A secondary signal, embedded in the tool chest data, that he and Tors translated later and found to mean approximately. They do not always keep schedule. What was coming did not keep a schedule. It did not, as far as the Vorath data indicated and the next 72 hours confirmed, operate on a basis of intent the way the Vorath did or the way humans did. It was not a species, not precisely. The Vorath's nearest term for it translated, through 7 layers of mathematical compression, to something like asterisk the hollowing, a wavefront phenomenon, something that moved through space and altered what it moved through, not with malice but with the indifference of weather, and like weather, it could be survived if you had the right shelter. The shielding architecture from the chorus was not finished. 48 days of compressed, exhausted, international collaboration had produced versions of the technology at scale, implementations across major population centers, prototype installations at atmospheric emission points, a framework that the Vorath's data said was sufficient for 70 to 80% coverage. Not perfect. Not what it could have been with another 15 days. Marcus looked at the displays showing the approach trajectory and thought, 70 to 80%. He thought about the Vorath, who had been building asterisk the physics of endurance for what the chorus implied was centuries, and who had still chosen to slow down and share it with a species that had had 6 years' notice, and had spent most of those 6 years debating whether the signal was real. He thought about the small, barnacle-covered, irrational human instinct to survive. Not cleverly, not with perfect preparation, just to survive, through stubbornness and improvisation and the specific human talent for being in the wrong place at the wrong time and making it work anyway. He picked up the secure line. He reached Calloway in 40 seconds. "We're at 70%, Calloway said before Marcus could speak. "The modeling says." "I know what the modeling says." Marcus looked at the displays. "I want to transmit to the Vorath vessel, right now." "What do you want to say?" Marcus thought for a moment. He thought about the message at 3:17 a.m. He thought about the jump through the door. He thought about all the ways that humans, throughout the entire catalog of their existence, had looked at something impossible and said, "We're going to try anyway." "Tell them we're ready," he said, "and tell them thank you." The event lasted 11 hours. The hollowing asterisk moved through the near-Earth orbital environment with a quality that the instruments recorded, and the physics team spent 3 years after the fact trying to classify. It was not a wave in the traditional electromagnetic sense. It interacted with the shielding architecture the way wind interacts with certain geometries of structure, not blocked, exactly, but redirected, diffused, broken into something manageable. The 70% coverage held. The installations in 32 cities performed beyond the modeling's conservative estimates. There were failures. There were always failures. This was another thing Marcus wrote into his report months later, in the section that the editing committee kept trying to soften, and he kept pushing back to its original bluntness. The failure rate was acceptable only because human adaptability in the face of failure is, structurally, a form of success. 3 installations went offline and were rerouted by technicians who improvised solutions in real time that had not existed in any protocol. 2 others failed completely, and the communities they covered survived anyway, through a combination of geographic luck and, in one documented case, a physics teacher in Osaka who had read the chorus data independently and built a partial shield in a school gymnasium out of materials he'd been stockpiling since day 40. The Vorath vessel remained in orbit throughout. It did not intervene. Marcus thought he understood why afterward the Vorath had given them the tools, the curriculum, the physics of endurance. What they had not given, what they could not give, was the enduring itself. That part was specifically, irrevocably human. The mess and the improvisation and the physics teacher and the gymnasium and the 3 rerouted installations and the 11 hours of a species holding together with 70% coverage and stubbornness and the desperate, irrational conviction that this is survivable. It was survivable. On the morning of the 12th day after the event, when the shielding networks were being assessed and the world was doing the thing it always does, which is argue about what had just happened even while the evidence of what had happened was still settling, Marcus walked out of the Department of First Contact Protocols into the Alameda morning and found Selene sitting on the hood of a rental car in the parking lot. She had a thermos. She was wearing a jacket that was slightly too large, the kind you buy at an airport because your luggage didn't make it. Her hair was down. She looked like someone who had driven through the night, or flown, or done whatever it took to be in a parking lot in Alameda at 8 in the morning when the world was 12 days from the end of the worst of it. She held out the thermos. He took it. He sat on the hood next to her. The coffee was good, the particular kind of good that has nothing to do with the coffee and everything to do with the context. "I saw the news," she said. "Which part?" "The physics teacher in Osaka," she paused, "the gymnasium. Took the whole chorus library and built a partial installation out of ferrofluid and copper mesh," Marcus said. "The Vorath's material specifications aren't written for human resources, obviously. He adapted them in 48 days working alone." He shook his head slightly. "The department has already recruited him." Selene was quiet for a moment. The morning was ordinary, cars on the road beyond the facility fence, the sound of something that might have been a crow, the industrial smell of the bay. The kind of morning that was exactly like every other morning before everything changed, and also nothing like it at all. "Your message," she said, "the 3 a.m. one." "Yeah. I've been thinking about it." She turned to look at him. She had the expression she got when she was going to say something that had been a long time in formation. He knew that expression, had missed it, had carried it around with him for 57 days. "You said, whatever made you run, I hope you find your way back from it. Not back to you, just back." "I remember. I found my way back," she said. "It turns out the destination was the same either way." Marcus sat with that for a moment. The thermos was warm in his hands. The morning was ordinary and extraordinary, and there was an alien vessel in orbit overhead that had spent decades slowing down for a species it had never met, because the species was in the path of something terrible, and the Vorath, whatever the Vorath were, in whatever ethics had shaped their centuries of endurance, had decided that this was reason enough to stop. "This is why we slowed down." He thought that was about the most human thing he had ever heard, and he had not heard it from a human. "The department is going to want me for another year at minimum," he said. "There's more in the chorus. We've barely scratched the physics. And the Vorath, I think they want to talk, actually talk, not just maps and countdowns. I think they've been waiting to have a real conversation, and I think I might be one of the people they'll want to have it with." "An alien diplomat," Selene said. "A translator, poorly paid, terrible hours, facility smells like old coffee." "I run a company," she said, I can tolerate the hours, she paused, and I can bring better coffee. He looked at her. She looked at him. The crow, or whatever it was, called somewhere in the direction of the bay, and the morning went on being ordinary and extraordinary, and full of the specific, irreducible, impossible texture of things that have survived what they should not have survived and are still here, which is the closest thing to a miracle that the world has ever managed to produce. Okay, he said. It was the same word he had said in a parking lot in Marin County to his sister 57 days ago, when the world had been simpler and larger and easier to hold all at once. It meant something different now. It meant, yes, it meant here. It meant the thing that does not negotiate with what is coming, the thing that improvises and adapts and builds a shield in a gymnasium out of ferrofluid and copper mesh and stubbornness and love. It meant we slowed down too. Above them, just visible as a faint, elongated shape against the pale morning sky, if you knew exactly where to look, the Vorith vessel maintained its patient orbit. It had been there for 69 days. It would stay, Marcus knew from the latest signal exchanges, for another several months. There was more to share, more curriculum in the chorus, more of the asterisk physics of endurance asterisk to translate into human hands and human resources and human improvisation. The relationship between Earth and whatever the Vorith were was only at its beginning, and beginnings were always the hardest part, because the beginning is where you are most exposed, most uncertain, most aware of everything you don't know. Marcus had always been good at beginnings. He had learned in the past 57 days that he was also good at the parts that came after, the sustained, ordinary, occasionally gas station sushi-fueled work of staying present for something that mattered, even when you didn't know how it would end, even when the architecture was only 70% complete, even when the thing you were building was still, in many important ways, uncertain. You stayed, you transmitted the honest signal, you waited for what came back. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes enough, what came back was worth the waiting. The morning opened around them, clear and broad and full of what was next, and Marcus Ito, translator, sometime alien diplomat, person who sent honest messages at 3 in the morning and meant every word of them, drank his coffee and let it be enough. There is a photograph, taken by a journalist who had been embedded with the Department of First Contact Protocols for what she thought was a story about bureaucratic dysfunction, and turned out to be something else entirely. That ends up in every subsequent historical account of what humans call the contact year. It shows the parking lot of the Alameda facility at 8:14 a.m. on the 12th day after the event. In the foreground, 2 people sit on the hood of a rental car. The angle is from a distance, the photographer too far away to have heard what they were saying. In the background, visible above the roofline of the facility, the elongated shape of the Vorith vessel catches the morning light. The photograph's formal composition is accidental. The journalist said later that she had been trying to document the building, not the people on the car, and they had happened to be in frame. But what it captures is something that no amount of formal composition could have improved. The specific quality of 2 small human figures against a sky that has changed permanently, holding coffee, in the ordinary morning, alive. Marcus did not see the photograph until 3 months after it was taken. By then he was deep in what the department had taken to calling the second phase, the real work, the sustained work, the years of translation that the chorus's depth implied. It was slower than the first 12 days. It lacked the compressed electricity of crisis, the biological clarity that comes from operating at the edge of what the body can sustain. It was, instead, the kind of work that requires a different muscle entirely. Patience, attention, the willingness to sit with something you don't fully understand and wait for the understanding to arrive on its own terms. He was good at that. Yeva had taken to calling him the most patient translator in human history, which he accepted as the compliment she intended, and the gentle ribbing she also intended. Tors had moved back to MIT but collaborated remotely, and could often be found in the encrypted signal channel at 2 in the morning because Tors, it turned out, had the night owl habits of someone who had found his native environment and refused to leave it. Calloway had been promoted to something so senior it had no clear title, and appeared to involve a great deal of video calls with heads of state, a role he performed with the look of a man who had survived something, and was surprised to find himself grateful for the endurance it had built. The Vorath, for their part, proved to be extraordinary correspondents. They were, as Marcus had guessed, deeply interested in conversation. Not in the anxious, performative way that humans were interested in conversation, not the filling of silence with sound to prove aliveness. The Vorath communicated with the deliberateness of beings who had developed their communication across vast timescales and vast distances, and had therefore developed a relationship to language that was less about transmission and more about architecture. Every exchange built on every previous exchange, nothing wasted, nothing repeated, every new element added to a structure that was slowly becoming something no single message could contain. A relationship, in the broadest sense of the word. Marcus found, to his genuine surprise, that he was suited to this. He had spent his adult life inside language, not performing it, but attending to it, the way a person attends to something that matters more than they can easily say. The Vorath communicated in layers, in echoes, in the structural grammar of the chorus and the denser vocabulary of the second signal, and eventually in forms that had no precedent in either, forms that Marcus and his team built new notation to describe, because the existing mathematical vocabulary simply did not have the resolution. Cellini, who had moved to the Bay Area with the pragmatic efficiency of someone who had decided on a direction and was implementing it, occasionally sat in on translation sessions when her schedule allowed. She did not have Marcus's training, but she had something that turned out to be equally useful, the instinct for pattern that had made her one of the most effective logistics executives in the Pacific Rim. She could not read the Vorath signals directly, but she could look at the rendered translations and identify structures that Marcus was too close to the source material to see clearly. She had contributed 3 significant translation corrections in the first 6 months, which Tors called statistically improbable, and Yeva called characteristic of someone who was not thinking about the mathematics, and was therefore not making the same assumptions the mathematics encouraged. It was not a simple life. Marcus had not expected simple. He had sent an honest message at 3:17 in the morning, and what had come back was not simplicity but something better, substance. A person in the parking lot with good coffee, a job that mattered, a species that had survived what it should not have survived and was still, stubbornly, productively, characteristically here. He thought sometimes about the film his sister had made him watch, The Teenagers with the Portal, the parents on the other side. He thought about the specific courage of jumping through a door when you don't know what's on the other side, only that the people you can't afford to lose are there. He thought about how that courage was not special. It was not the courage of heroes or the exceptional. It was the ordinary courage of people who have something to go back for, who press their hands against the wall of wherever they are, the cold paint, the known texture, and decide that there is worth the crossing. The Vorath had pressed their hands against the mathematics of a distant species and decided it was worth slowing down for. The physics teacher in Osaka had pressed his hands against a design specification in a language he barely understood and decided to build the thing anyway. Marcus had pressed his hands against the keyboard at 3:17 in the morning and sent the truest thing he knew how to send. And 70% had held. And 70% was enough. This was the thing that Marcus wrote, eventually, in the preface to the first published translation guide to the Vorath chorus signal. The document that was technically a Department of First Contact Protocol's internal report, and practically the most widely read scientific text of the 21st century, because nothing that mattered in that century stayed internal for long. He wrote it in the kind of language that the department's editing committee found imprecise, and he found necessary, because precision was not always the right tool, and sometimes the right tool was honesty. The Vorath came here because we were in the path of something, and they saw us, and they decided we were worth stopping for. I have spent 3 years trying to understand what they saw. I think what they saw was not our technology or our mathematics or our capacity for the physics of endurance. I think they saw what the chorus was designed to give us time to demonstrate, that we would try. That faced with something overwhelming and 12 days warning and 70% coverage, we would show up in a gymnasium in Osaka with ferrofluid and copper mesh and our hands full of borrowed physics, and we would try anyway. That is what humans do. We try. We fail and we improvise and we try again, and we do not stop trying until the thing we are trying to do is done or we are, and even then, sometimes, someone else picks it up. The Vorath have a word for this. Their nearest term in the mathematical grammar we now share translates to something like, the endurance that does not know it is endurance, the thing that keeps going because it has not thought to stop. They said they knew this about us before they reached us. They said the evidence was in every transmission we had ever sent into space, not the content of the transmissions, which they found bewildering in ways we are still working to understand, but the fact of them, that we kept sending. That for decades, with no evidence of reply, with every rational reason to conclude we were alone, we kept pointing our instruments at the dark and saying, we are here, is anyone there, we are here. They said that is why we slowed down. The coffee machine in the break room still beeped at inconvenient moments. The facility still smelled like old electronics and institutional cleaning fluid. The crow, or whatever it was, still called from the direction of the bay on clear mornings. And in a parking lot in Alameda, in a photograph that had ended up on the cover of 3 magazines and the wall of a museum, and the desktop backgrounds of an improbable number of people who could not quite articulate why it moved them. 2 people sat on the hood of a rental car with coffee in the ordinary morning light, small against the changed sky, alive. The Vorath vessel turned in its patient orbit above them. In the signal room, the chorus rolled and rolled, full of things still waiting to be understood. Marcus Ito put his phone in his pocket and drank his coffee and watched the morning come in from the bay. And it was, in all the ways that a morning can be, enough. In the months that followed the contact year, a particular kind of letter became common. Not to governments, not to the Department of First Contact Protocols, not to the academic institutions that published the tidal wave of chorus-derived research. To Marcus, personally. The department's communications team forwarded a curated selection. They had to curate, because the volume was simply not manageable otherwise. Thousands of letters arriving from everywhere, in dozens of languages, saying variations of the same thing. They said thank you. Some of them said it about the physics, about the shielding technology that was now, in various adapted forms, entering civilian infrastructure, its applications extending into materials science and signal engineering, and a dozen adjacent fields that the chorus had illuminated in passing on its way to saying something larger. Some of them said it about the translation work, the teams of linguists and mathematicians, and one surprisingly well-calibrated logistics executive who had built the framework for human Vorath communication, who had taken the impossible and turned it into vocabulary. But many of them, the ones Marcus read on the nights when Selene was traveling and the apartment was quiet, and the signal from the Vorath vessel, now a permanent and understood presence in the orbital environment, pulsed its steady patient rhythm through the department's receivers, said it about the message. Not the official messages, not the transmissions from the department to the vessel, the 3:17 a.m. message, the one that had leaked in the way things leak when enough people know about them and the story attached to them is too human to contain. I was there. I meant all of it. Whatever happened to you, I hope you find your way back from it. Not to me, just back. People identified with that message in ways Marcus had not anticipated and could not entirely account for. They wrote to him about people they had lost and things they had meant and messages they had never sent, or had sent too late, or had sent without knowing if anything would come back. They wrote about the specific loneliness of loving something that does not know you are trying. They wrote sometimes about the Vorath, about what it felt like to know that out there in the incomprehensible dark, something had seen the fact of human persistence and decided it was worth stopping for. Some of them found this comforting. Some found it overwhelming, some found it both. Marcus wrote back when he could. He was not systematic about it. Scifi had offered twice to set up an actual response system, with templates and scheduling, and he had declined both times, not because the offer wasn't sensible but because the letters deserved what they were asking for, which was not efficiency but contact. He wrote back in the evenings, a few at a time, in his own handwriting when the letter had been handwritten and in plain text when it had been typed, and he tried to say the thing that was actually true rather than the thing that was kind. The thing that was actually true was usually also kind, which he had learned in the contact year and in the years after it, was not a coincidence. The truth and the kind thing were more often the same thing than people assumed, and the divergence between them was usually fear. Fear of the response, fear of exposure, fear of the specific vulnerability of sending something honest into the dark with no guarantee of what comes back. He had sent something honest into the dark at 3:17 in the morning. The Vorath had spent decades sending something honest into the dark in the form of a signal that said, "We are here, there is danger, there is time, here is what you need." Neither of them had known what would come back. Both of them had sent anyway. This, Marcus thought, was the thing worth saying, not the physics, not the translation protocols, not the remarkable, salvageable fact that 70% had held. The thing worth saying was smaller than all of that and larger at the same time, the way small true things usually are. The willingness to send the signal without knowing what it will reach. The willingness to be, in the cold and the silence and the 3 a.m. of whatever your particular 3 a.m. is, the person who tells the truth about where they are. We are here, we meant all of it. Whatever is coming, we are trying. And the answer that came back eventually always came back to this, not alone. He folded the letter he had been writing, a response to a woman in Reykjavik who had sent him a 4-page handwritten account of the night of the event, and the particular quality of the sky there, so far north, lit by the physics at work in the atmosphere, a sky that she described as looking like the aurora but different, like the aurora if the aurora were trying to tell you something, and he set it beside the others to be mailed in the morning. The apartment was quiet. Outside, the bay was doing what it always did, the particular darkness of water that is not quite land and not quite sky, the sound of it more than the sight. Somewhere above the cloud layer, the Vorath vessel turned. In the signal room at the department, the night shift was running the latest batch of chorus data through the new translation suite, the one Tors had helped build, the one that had already identified 6 previously unrecognized encoding layers in the signal's tertiary frequency band, each one containing material that would take years to unpack, principles of the asterisk physics of endurance that the Vorath had included, knowing they might not be reached for a generation. Patient gifts left in a signal that had played for 6 years and would be studied for 100 more. Marcus picked up his phone. It was not 3:17 in the morning. It was 11:42 at night, and Scifi was asleep in the bedroom, and the apartment smelled like coffee and the particular clean scent of paper from the stacks of translated signal data that covered most of the dining table, and outside was the bay, and above the bay was everything. He did not send a message. There was nothing to send, no urgent honesty pressing against the inside of his ribs looking for a way out. Everything was said. Everything was being said slowly, in the painstaking and beautiful grammar of 2 species learning each other's language. In the break room and the signal room and the parking lots, and the letters and the ongoing fact of the vessel's patient orbit, in the physics teacher's gymnasium and the rerouted installations, and the 11 hours that it held, in all the small human textures that the Vorath had been watching for decades and had found sufficient. He put the phone down. He went to the window. The bay moved in the dark. The signal from the chorus pulsed, steady, patient, full of things still waiting to be understood. Marcus Edo, translator, stood at the window and listened. This was what he was good at. This was the thing he had always been good at, the attending, the willingness to be in the presence of something vast and not demand that it speak faster. The thing the department had found useful. The thing the Vorath had, in their methodical way, identified as something worth slowing down for. He listened. The bay moved, the signal pulsed. Above the cloud layer, enormous and patient in its orbit, the vessel turned. It was, in all the ways that a night can be, enough. And in the morning there would be more to do, and more to translate, and more of the long, sustained, ordinary, extraordinary work of being the species that was here when it needed to be, that had held at 70%, that had built a shield in a gymnasium and sent honest messages into the dark and been found, in the end, sufficient. More than sufficient. Exactly enough.